All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Don West, and I'm the chairperson of the Carroll County Democratic Central Committee. Kathleen, welcome. I want to welcome everybody here to the South Carroll Senior Center for this forum for the Congressional District 8 candidates, the Democratic candidates. This event is organized by the Carroll County Democratic Central Committee. First off, I'd like everybody to rise, stand up. Please be careful on the podium because I know it's tight. And we're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is behind you guys. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You can be seated. As I said, tonight's events are organized by the Central Committee. If you're on the Central Committee, why don't you just kind of raise your hand if you want to admit to it. And I do that also because there is the opportunity still, if you have a question that you would like to submit during tonight's discussion, seek out one of the Central Committee members, or people will have 3x5 cards. You can write your question down, and those questions will be given to our moderators. They do have a lot of questions. Can't guarantee that they'll all be gotten to. If I keep my comments to a minimum, there's a much better chance that they will. I should mention also, our next big event for the Central Committee is we will have our Democratic Victory Dinner on May the 19th in Westminster. If you're interested in information, please see one of the Central Committee members. Also, if you happen to not be registered to vote, I hope you all are, okay, I'm going to make that assumption, but we do have materials here tonight that you can register to vote in the upcoming primary, which is April the 26th. Very quickly, ground rules for tonight. Our candidates will start with a 1-minute opening statement. There's 9 candidates. We've tried to keep it brief. It'll be 1 minute. We have a timer. He'll give you a 30-second and a stop. All right? For the questions, 1-minute responses. Same thing, 30-second sign and a stop. At the sole discretion of the monitors, or the moderators, if there is a follow-up or something that they would like to ask to continue the question, there would be the opportunity for 30 seconds at that point. And then finally, closing statements. Each candidate will get 2 minutes for their closing statement. All right, and again, I emphasize all the questions that are asked, the format, are at the discretion of the moderators. Okay, if you submit a question, they may reword it a little bit for clarity. They will take responsibility for that. At this time, I would introduce our moderators, Wayne Carter from the Carroll County Times, the editor, and Charles Harrison of the Carroll County Democratic Central Committee, co-moderators for tonight. They will introduce the candidates. Thank you. The final thing I'll say is, please be respectful towards the moderators, the candidates, and your fellow attendees tonight. I think we can do this without getting too excited. It is political, though, so I think clapping is okay. You know, register your approval, but please be respectful. Thank you very much. Enjoy the debate.
Okay. We ready? Okay, well, good evening to our esteemed candidates, and thank you for coming to Carroll County. Thank you. Also, thank you to our audience of concerned citizens, and welcome to the Carroll County Central Committee 8th Congressional District Forum. For the purpose of our audiences, we're going to go down the line and introduce our candidates. First, we've got Greg Picaroy setting in for Kumar Brave. We've got David Anderson, Dan Bowling, William Gerando, Kathleen Matthews, David Trone, Joel Rubin, Ansel Gutierrez. I can't roll the R's. Oh, he's not here. Oh, she's not here. Okay. Okay, I understand. And we've got Krista Burton sitting in for Jamie Raskin. All right. Why don't we start this session with Greg Picarora, who's sitting in for Kumar. Would you like to read a statement?
Thank you. Kumar sends his thanks. He's running a temperature of 102 degrees and thought it was best that he not come and infect the people of Carroll County. So I'm going to read a statement that is from him. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak to you directly. I regret not being here to join you because communications without the filter of money, television, and print media is vitally important to our democracy. I am running for Congress to lead a national effort to rebuild our economy and our middle class the old-fashioned American way through the use of technology, skills training, and tuition assistance. I believe those who say we must choose between a clean environment versus a robust economy are wrong, and I vow to defeat this false choice. As I have in the House of Delegates, I will lead the effort to require the use of renewable energy. Tonight, 15% of the electricity lighting this room is renewable. By 2030, that percentage will be 40% under a law I am sponsoring this year. This year, 5,000 jobs paying an average of $70,000 a year will be created in Maryland alone by our scientists through a program named TEDCO, which I helped create. And I lead the effort to close corporate tax loopholes and freeze tuition at our university for 4 years. All of these accomplishments were bipartisan. We need more of this in Washington. Like all the others here tonight, I support gun control, Planned Parenthood, marriage equality, and the end of the death penalty. But I'm also a middle-class guy, a product of the Montgomery County Public School System, which propelled me to Georgetown University and a degree in accounting. Today, I am the CFO of an environmental company in Rockville, where I also live with my wife, Maureen. There is so much more I could say, but instead, let me invite you to call me on my cell phone at 240-498-0209 or email me at kumarbarve@gmail.com. Thank you so much, and remember to get your flu shots.
Okay. Well, thank you for standing in, Greg. Let's move on to the other end of the table. And Krista, would you like to make a statement on behalf of Ms. Raskin?
Yes, thank you. To the members of the Carroll County Democratic Party, Don West, fellow Democrats, dear friends, please forgive my absence today. I am in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee hearing this afternoon, and the hearings are still going on as I write and as you meet. We are taking up some very important legislation, 9 bills, including 3 pieces of gun safety legislation I am sponsoring, including one for universal background checks for all firearms, one to compel convicted domestic abusers to surrender their guns, and one to improve communications between police departments so local law enforcement is notified when people who are legally disqualified apply for gun permits. Congressman Van Hollen and Attorney General Frosch came today to testify in support of this legislative package, and I am working late to ensure it passes committee and receives strong bipartisan support in the House and Senate. The chairman has called for a voting session after these hearings, and so my chances of joining you are vanishingly small. I have asked Krista Burton to take meticulous notes during this forum so I can write in any responses to the questions that would be helpful to you in your decision-making process, and I will come back to Carroll County at the earliest possible moment. In the meantime, please permit me to introduce myself to those of you whom I do not know yet. I am a state senator representing District 20, Silver Spring, and Tacoma Park. I'm currently the majority whip of the Senate, and I'm proud to say I've been at the center of breakthrough policy changes in Maryland over the last decade. I led the fight in the Senate for marriage equality, to ban military-style assault weapons, to pass strong environmental protections, and to lower greenhouse gas emissions, to ban the death penalty, to restore voting rights to ex-offenders, and to raise the minimum wage. The reason that Attorney General Brian Frosch, the Sierra Club, the Maryland State Education Association, the 72-member Congressional Progressive Caucus, and dozens of other elected officials and labor groups have joined this campaign is because they know I have been an effective progressive leader in Annapolis, and I bring a proven track record of legislative success to Congress. The issues we face today are not going to be solved one state at a time. I worked with Brian Frosch to pass the toughest gun safety law in America, but yet we still have one of the bloodiest summers on record in Baltimore, where the majority of guns recovered at crime scenes came from out-of-state sources. We need leadership in Washington to take on the NRA the way I've taken them on in Annapolis, and to pass common-sense Maryland-style reforms like closing the gun show loophole and banning assault weapons. And while we've passed strong environmental protections, lowered greenhouse gas emissions, and worked to protect the Chesapeake Bay, we are still getting Fs from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation because 50 waterways flow here from out of state. We need federal leadership to take on the carbon barons and fight for a renewable future and green economy. After 10 years in public service as an effective progressive leader, I present to you a record of legislative success and political activism that makes me an excellent candidate to replace Chris Van Hollen in Congress. I hope you will consider voting for me, even though I am prevented from being here this evening. I look forward to returning to Carroll County soon and working together to ensure a bright future for our vibrant Democratic Party, our district, and our country. Very truly yours, Senator Jamie Raskin.
Okay, thank you so much, Krista, for bringing those words. And we hope to see all of the candidates, those that are not here, back in Carroll County in the near future. Okay, let me also state that if the candidates would be so kind as to watch the timer, he will be giving you an indication of when your time is up. Yeah.
The rest of it, so it's more equalized in 1 minute versus 4 minutes almost?
No. All right, now, moving right along, why don't we start with the first question, and the way we'll handle, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Our opening statements.
Yes, take time and spread out a little bit here. We've got one more candidate. Pardon?
All right. What we'll do now is we'll go down the line for the rest of the candidates to give their opening statements, starting with Mr. David Anderson.
Great. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Dave Anderson, and I'm running to be your congressman. I'm not a career politician or a millionaire. I've worked with Democrats and Republicans in 20 state legislatures for the last 11 years in order to raise millions of dollars for college students to come to Washington. I'm a bridge builder. My signature family policy and my approach to Social Security both draw from both sides of the aisle. I've also made it a point in this campaign to try to represent the entire 8th District. In fact, I have campaigned all over Carroll County. I have been up here 14 times knocking on doors. In this race, I'm actually the least liberal of the pack, but I am the most inclusive, especially in the way that I give attention to Carroll County and also Frederick County, where I have been campaigning the last few months at great length also. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Bowling, excuse me.
Thank you all for coming. It's great to be here with you. I'm a son of Indiana, and I live in Bethesda, and I feel, like I'd say, kind of comfortable out here. Right now, there are about 30 bills that have been introduced in Congress on women's health, on protecting, on promoting pay equity, on things that are important for families and women. And if you go to a website called govtrack.us, they predict the likelihood of passage of all these bills. And it's about 1%, 2%, or 0%. And the most common reason given is, this is a precise quote, the sponsor is a member of the minority party. We have a system that votes not on the merits of bills, but on who sponsored it. There's one state in the country that fixed that 80 years ago, where Republicans last year voted to end the death penalty, to give driver's licenses, to raise the minimum wage, and to raise taxes for improving the roads and bridges. The reform that they did 80 years ago in that state, Nebraska, which is not about unicameralism, can in fact be done in Congress. And my campaign is committed to fixing Congress.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Mr. Jawanda?
Thank you. Opportunity. It's why we come to America. It's why we believe in the American dream. But for too many, it's slipping away. My mom is in the audience. I'm going to spend 2 seconds to acknowledge her. She lives in Manchester, unfortunately in Andy Harris's district, but you can't vote for me. But she's here today and moved here after growing up in Hayes, Kansas, which is kind of similar to here. I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland. After graduating high school, she moved out here to Manchester. My dad's from Nigeria, came to this country seeking opportunity. And as I said, it's slipping away. My life is a testament to the American dream. Grew up with humble roots, not very rich, not much money. Earned scholarships to high school, college, and law school, and been very fortunate to work with President Obama in the White House and pass the Lilly Ledbetter Act to help pass health care, to work for Nancy Pelosi, the first woman speaker. And now we're running for Congress. Only in America is my story possible. But it started because of opportunity. And we have to ensure that for everybody going forward, and that's what's at stake in this election, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So great to meet everybody.
Thank you. Ms. Matthews?
Thank you, and good evening. I'm Kathleen Matthews, and I've spent the day in Westminster. I had a chance just to come from McDaniel College, where I was talking to about 100 poli-sci students and faculty, and I love campaigning in Carroll County. It's been a pleasure to be up here throughout your area, and I'm really thrilled to be here at your beautiful senior center tonight. I'm running for Congress because, like all of you, I am frustrated by the gridlock. I'm frustrated by Republicans who just try to prevent President Obama from having any victories and are blocking action on climate change, action on common sense gun safety, action to protect women's health and reproductive rights. And I just said enough is enough, and I decided to get off the sidelines and jump into this race for Congress. I bring a long history as a journalist who covered the issues of this area. I was on ABC7, Channel 7 for 25 years as a reporter covering breaking news, crime, education, and the challenges facing working families. And too many working families, I think, feel a sense of economic insecurity, and I want to be your fighter, and that's why I'm running, and I look forward to talking about the issues tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Trone?
I think it's very important to talk about character as you look through tonight the candidates and think about experience. I grew up on a farm just 15 miles north of the district in East Berlin, Pennsylvania, Adams County. And on that farm, we had 55,000 chickens. We had 600 hogs. I understand Carroll County. I understand Frederick County. And I think that's an important distinction. We have an office on 62 Main Street right here in Westminster. We have an office in Walkersville. And we have an office in Rockville. We're the candidate that's looking outside the Beltway and understanding the importance of all three counties. But the work ethic we had and learned on the farm, and also the failure we experienced on the farm when we lost that farm due to some economic difficulties, and my father had some issues with drinking, that led to myself going back to graduate school, and that led to a whole new business, which is now across the country in 21 states with 5,000 employees in 150 stores. And that's a record of job creation. And that's a unique skill set.
Thank you. Mr. Rubin?
Good evening. Thrilled to be here with you. I come from a family of teachers and veterans. My grandfather was in World War II, my father in Vietnam, my mother is a college professor, and I studied education and joined the Peace Corps after college, following their ways of service. I've spent nearly the last 20 years of my life in public service, as a civil servant, as well as a political appointee in the Obama administration as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in charge of our work with the House of Representatives. And through these experiences, I've become deeply concerned about the direction of the country and also have a track record of getting things done in the House of Representatives, the body where we all want to serve. And I promise you that if you elect me and if I have your support, we will do great things in Congress because we can. I've seen it. We've won big fights on national security. We can win big fights on women's health, on social security, on energy and climate issues, and the like. So I look forward to speaking with you this evening, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. Ms. Sol Gutierrez.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. It's a long way from Annapolis. I had a capital budget hearing till about 5:20. I've been driving here. I made a wrong turn. I went to the rifle range. I got out. There was a meeting. And I said, is this where the candidates' meeting is? And they looked at me. I was the only woman there. So I knew I was at the wrong place. But I'm here at the right place. And I'm delighted to be here with you. As I mentioned, I come from Annapolis. I've been serving as a state legislator for 14 years. And before that, I was 8 years on the school board. So I have public policy budget experience. I know what it is how hard it is to make those decisions that affect every one of our lives. And I think that's very important. You need to have public policy. You need to understand how government works. You need to know how budgets work. And so I bring that experience to you, and I hope we get a chance to talk about the importance of that later on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Okay, let's begin the questioning. And to be perfectly fair about this, we will ask each of you a question first, and starting with Mr. Anderson. Okay, Mr. Anderson, the term safe seats has been developed, and it refers to congressional districts where the likelihood of election it's high. Okay, those safe seats have contributed to the polarization of Congress, but since the districts are drawn up by the states, the process is highly politicized at this juncture. How would you, if elected, try to solve the problems associated with gerrymandering that has, in fact, created your district?
Well, it's a big problem. I used to be an academic, and I taught ethics and politics at George Washington University for 12 years. So this is the kind of issue that's a no-brainer. We should have impartial boards that choose the districts. What we have now is a system where states which have supermajorities of Democrats or Republicans can control things. And in Maryland, what happened here was a number of the legislators actually in this race, Senator Raskin and Representative Barbee, did vote for the last gerrymandering. So the way to solve this is not state by state, because the states like Maryland, which have now a Republican governor who rightly wants to have impartial boards, the Senate and the House have said they're not going to comply. So we got to take this to the federal level, and so therefore in Congress I would support legislation to call for impartial boards so that we would not have the kind of gridlock which gets perpetuated by the gerrymandering.
Thank you. Mr. Bowley?
I don't know if you know that Maryland is now the most gerrymandered state in the country. And Jamie Raskin and Kumar Barbee are good people. But what they said is they were under such pressure that they had to go along. Now, Anna didn't go along. Anna deserves credit for not voting for the gerrymandering. Sorry, Will. The gerrymandering disenfranchises Republicans in Democratic gerrymandered areas, and because we have a closed system, it disenfranchises independents and unaffiliated. You have your public servants taking away your effective right to vote. That sounds like corruption, doesn't it? Okay, that's a strong word. Representative Delaney in the 6th District has a bill before Congress called the Open Our Democracy Act, which would make all of the primaries nonpartisan and would allow everybody to vote, and I will support that bill.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Juando?
Thank you. Yeah, gerrymandering and money in politics are the two most corrosive things in our politics right now, and they're related. There are 435 members in the House of Representatives. A center in Washington that my wife works for, Center for American Progress, did a study about the seats that are actually up and available to be swing seats, so what we call purple seats. Only 90 seats out of the 435 are swing seats because of the way the lines have been drawn. Both parties are to blame. I think the Republicans have been much worse, but both parties are to blame. And in Maryland, it was wrong to vote on that bill a couple years ago, and that's what it de-influences you all. Okay, 80% of our districts in Montgomery County, 20% is up in Frederick and Carroll. Carroll County is actually the smallest part. So there's really not a lot of incentive. We're going to do it because I'm going to be a great member of Congress and my mom lives here, but not everyone's going to have an incentive to listening to you. And so it's bad for democracy, and we need to fix it.
Thank you.
I started out by talking about the gridlock in Washington, and that gridlock is caused because we have so much partisanship, and that's because of the gerrymandering. It's because Republicans are in safe seats, but they are outflanked by people to their right, and Democrats are in safe seats, and they're outflanked by people to their left, and so we've got this big divide and nobody building bridges. So I, too, support a national commission to take a look at redistricting across this country. We need to get bipartisan support for that committee. We need to get governors involved. We need to get independent thinkers, the same way we had the Simpson-Bowles Commission look at the debt. We need something like that for gerrymandering. And that will give you the voice that you deserve, and also will have representatives that are representative of you and your districts.
Thank you.
Gerrymandering basically is politicians picking their voters. I thought it was supposed to be the other way around. The voters pick the politicians, but that's not how they've handled it. It's a problem, disaster, Republicans and Democrats equally. Everyone is to blame. As has been said over and over, it has led to the gridlock. It has led to the polarization of our parties. The far left fighting the far right, no one meeting in the middle, no one looking for practical solutions, and no one acting like Americans versus Republicans and Democrats.
Thank you.
On gerrymandering, as a Democrat, I believe we should have the courage of our convictions. We should be confident that we can win elections that are not gerrymandered. The gerrymandering of the state of Maryland will likely be thrown out by the Supreme Court, and it should be. But what this points to as well is the failure to engage the people in the political process. Roughly 10% of the people that live in our district will end up voting for the next member of Congress and in this upcoming election, which is in less than 6 weeks. That implies a depressed electorate, and it implies an electorate that does not feel empowered to make change. And what happens ultimately is that the people who run go to the party bosses in the establishment in their capitals to protect their seats rather than come to you, and that needs to stop.
Thank you.
Well, I did have the belief in my own convictions, and I stood up. 4 women voted against the map. We were convinced that that was not the process that needed to be followed for redistricting. It was just wrong. Unfortunately, because of the comments you've heard, indeed, it is incumbency protection. It started out every 10 years. There is a committee, an internal party committee, that says, tell me where you live, tell me where your parents live, tell me where your friends live, tell me where your opponents, your opposition lives, and then we'll draw something that will keep you in power. No, no, no. The voters are the ones who keep you in power. And that's what I believe. I worked with the League of Women Voters to apply standards to the congressional districts, and they did not even give us a hearing. I'll tell you about it later.
All right, thank you. Obviously, a lot of you have mentioned the political gridlock in D.C., which leads us to our next question. If elected, what will you do to break that political gridlock? And we'll start with Mr. Bowling.
Well, as I mentioned, we're going to fix Congress. Now, that sounds preposterous, but there's been reports in the Atlantic, in Politico, and NPR over the past couple years about how this 80-year pilot project has succeeded in, of all places, a red state, Nebraska. Last year, Nebraska, as I may have mentioned before, ended the death penalty, gave dreamers the right to get driver's licenses, raised the minimum wage, and raised taxes for their roads and bridges. And they were the Republicans who voted for it, because they dominate the legislature, were asked, why did you do this? This is not Republican orthodoxy. They said, well, you know, we don't have any party bosses to tell us what to do, and so we had to think about it and think about the evidence. And is it any surprise? I think we're Democrats because we think that Democratic policy is more evidence-based. So if Republicans, particularly moderate ones, have the chance to vote based on evidence and not on party, should we be surprised that they vote for our policies? And this reform, as you see on my website, is applicable, believe it or not, to the U.S. Congress.
Thank you.
I know you're skeptical.
Mr. Jawanda.
So we have to build coalitions, and that's a skill set, I think, in this race that's very important. When I worked on the Senate Education Committee under Sherrod Brown, Senator from Ohio, and then Senator Barack Obama, we had divided government. We had a Republican president for much of that time, but we were able to get things done. When I stood up as the youngest and only person of color in the room often and talked about the importance of Head Start, for example, for our low-income students, we still need to have universal pre-K, but we expanded Head Start to the largest number of slots ever. When I talked about the importance of Pell Grants so our kids can go to college and get the education they need to compete in the 21st century, we raised Pell Grants and lowered student interest rates. And this is with a Republican-led committee. I was at the table negotiating. That's a skill set we need. We're going to have to send someone to Congress who knows how to work in Congress. We also need fresh voices. Can't keep sending the same people from the same backgrounds, from the same communities, expect a different result. The definition of that, insanity.
Thank you.
How
Ms.
do you-
Matthews.
How do you break the gridlock? Well, you have to build relationships and you have to talk to each other. So for 25 years, I told you I was a television news reporter, and TV reporters talk to everybody. You talk to people on all sides of the issue. You gain their trust. You put people first and you tell their story. What I didn't tell you about is what I did for the last 9 years. When I worked for Marriott International, a big global company based in Bethesda, Maryland, in 80 countries around the world with 300,000 employees, and I was the senior woman in the company reporting to the CEO. Not everybody agreed with me. I worked with a lot of conservative Republicans in that company. But I knew that if I could get their trust, build a business case, and actually look at the problem-solving opportunities, I could get them to go along with me to be more environmentally sustainable, to be more diverse, and to get things done to create jobs and opportunity. That's how I do it in Congress.
Thank you.
Clearly, working across the aisle, working as Americans, it's clearly the answer. I have a head start, an advantage, in that my business goes across the country in 21 different states, 48 major metros, and that spans over 110 congressional districts. In those districts, my company has jobs, we have political contacts, we have work with charities, and we're able to reach out and touch Republicans and Democrats across the country to actually move things forward versus the gridlock that we're suffering right now.
Thank you. Mr. Rubin.
So gridlock is about engagement. I'm the only candidate here who's worked directly in partnership with Republicans when I was a career civil servant for 5 years. And I worked closely with Republicans. And you know what I found? There are people like all of us, and we can work with them, and we got a lot done. I wasn't in agreement with everything, and that's why I'm up here tonight. But I also did achieve some things when I was a staffer in Congress. I won an award, a bipartisan award for protecting military health care. And I won it from the Military Officers Association of America because I worked closely with Republican staffers to do what's right for the American people. And lastly, I have to say my wife is a Republican staffer in the House of Representatives. So every day we partner, every day we see difference and diversity. And I have to tell you, it enriches my life in every possible way. And I better be quiet at this point, otherwise I'll get in trouble.
Well, I think gridlock is really a failure to communicate. And I do believe I have the experience of coming together and finding common ground. When we find that we have mutual interests, then I think we begin to work together. We have a dialogue. But let me tell you where I learned it. I was appointed by President Clinton to serve at the U.S. Department of Transportation at a sub-cabinet level. And lo and behold, very soon after I began to serve, in areas that were common to everybody, in transportation, hazardous materials, Newt Gingrich was elected. And for the next 4 years, we had to work with a Congress that didn't want us to succeed, but we succeeded. The Clinton administration was a successful administration.
Oh, thank you.
Move it back to, the other end of the table with Mr. Anderson.
The key to addressing gridlock is to propose policies that speak to both sides of the aisle. The centerpiece of my campaign is a national family policy that does just that. Hardworking, young, middle-class families should get the following choice once a baby is born: 6 months of paid parental leave and $10,000 of child care support for 3 years, or 6 months of paid parental leave and a $10,000 tax credit for a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad. And this includes 2 moms and two dads. That policy speaks to Republicans and Democrats. That's the way you end gridlock.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. This is for Mr. Giwando. As you're well aware, having worked in the Obama administration, the Republicans have consistently attacked the Affordable Care Act. And now Senator Sanders wants to transform it into Medicare for everybody. What, if any, modifications would you make to the Affordable Health Care Act, which you support, and why?
Well, first of all, I was proud to work in the White House when we passed the Affordable Care Act, which is a culmination of 50 or 60 years of work. And I think it's a great accomplishment of President Obama, and we need to defend that. That's number one. Number two, it's not perfect, though, and we do need to make improvements. So what would I do? Drug prices. We know how high they are for everybody, but especially our seniors. We need to make sure that Medicare can negotiate for drug prices to lower the cost. Okay, we need to also make sure that drug companies don't price gouge and raise the price to astronomical rates so that people can't afford them. We also need to expand coverage. There's still millions of people who aren't covered. And we need to lower the premiums and out-of-pocket costs. I talked to a family yesterday, and they're still too high based on where you live. So we need to have interstate competition. That's like the one thing the Republicans in the debates talk about. You know, Donald Trump with the lines. He's right about that, but I think that's something that we should allow to happen. The insurance companies have too much control right now. But we can make improvements over time. We don't need to scrap the thing. I'm for the public option if we can get there, but that's going to take some time over time in Congress over time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Matthews.
I'm with Hillary Clinton and not with Bernie Sanders on this issue. I think we need to make the Affordable Care Act work even better. That means bringing more people into the system. One way we bring more people into the system is to pass comprehensive immigration reform, because you'll bring 11 million people who are living in this country without legal status into that system, because they'll be required to have health care. And that'll help bring the prices down. The more people that are in Obamacare, the lower the cost will be. Then you have to work with insurance companies, you have to work with the pharmaceuticals to bring down the prices, and that will move this in the right direction. Trying to go for a Medicare for all is not going to work right now, but ultimately that might be the future as we try to make the Affordable Care Act, as we have it now, work even better.
Thank you. Mr. Trump.
Clearly, the Affordable Care Act was a wonderful step forward. Every American deserves and needs to have health insurance. Rome wasn't built overnight. We're going to get there. President Obama made excellent strides. We can't slow down. We can't take our eye off the ball. We need to do some of the things that were mentioned here, such as fix Part D, the ability to negotiate to pay for drugs. $80 billion is spent on prescription drugs, and the big pharma wrote into legislation that you can't negotiate. That's wrong.
Thank God we have great health care in this country for many people. 2 years ago, I had major surgery. It was very risky. I came out well. My wife recently did also. We're grateful and fortunate, but we also had bills. And these insurance companies are gouging people, and we need to fix that. And we need to put pressure on them, and that means through a public option. And that means ensuring that the insurers don't feel like the ACA was made, Obamacare was made for them. It was made for us. At the end of the day, quality health care is about wellness and quality of life, and we need to make sure that that's what we think about, not the insurance companies.
Thank you. Ms. Sol Gutierrez.
Thank you. I will absolutely protect the Affordable Care Act. It is one of the most significant public policies that we have seen in the last few years. But I think we need to handle it with care if we're going to change it. It was very carefully crafted and balanced so that we knew that there would be enough revenues and that would cover the expenses. I served on this committee in Maryland that led the implementation of the health exchanges. Unfortunately, it was a fiasco from a technical perspective, but that's another story. I do think that we have to support the necessary changes, but we have to protect it and expand it. There are many people that are not covered, and it's in Maryland we've expanded it, but we have to expand it nationwide.
Thank you.
Mr. Anderson?
In an ideal world, we should have single-payer insurance, but we don't live in an ideal world, and so it's not really practical, at least in the next 10 years in the United States. Therefore, we not only must support the Affordable Care Act, the real task in the years ahead is to make sure that the right wing of the Republican Party doesn't repeal it. In terms of trying to reform it, I mean, in talking to people at their doors in Carroll and Frederick County, I've heard a lot about the out-of-pocket expenses. So we have to address, cutting down on co-payments and on deductible. I mean, we have to help families with those costs at this time, and also lower the cost for prescription drugs.
Thank you. Mr. Bowley?
So here's a thought experiment for you. Imagine that you go to your local car dealer to look at a Ford 150, F-150, or a Prius or a Hyundai, and you see that the prices on each of them is $90,000. And you say, what the? And because you know that, in Canada, they cost $30,000. Why are we paying $90,000 for our cars when they pay a third of that in Canada? We would be outraged. That's the case in healthcare. We're spending 3 times what other countries are paying. And I think what was missing in Obamacare was asking the entire healthcare industry a pointed question. What justifies our system costing 3 times as much? And then ask them to fix it.
All right, we're going to stay on the healthcare topic. Many of our young people struggle with mental health problems. What would you do to raise awareness about this issue and work towards more comprehensive and compassionate solutions? And we'll start with Ms. Matthews.
We've made a lot of progress, I think, but we continue to not treat mental health issues the way we treat regular health issues. We should be talking about mental health in the same way that you talk about other chronic illness like diabetes, and to destigmatize it. Because when it has a stigma, people don't seek care, they don't get the help they need to stay on their meds, and they aren't getting the treatment that's going to make them better. We've made some inroads in terms of mental health care being covered by the Affordable Care Act, and that's a good direction, but we need to go further. And we see this not only with what seems to be rising incidence of mental health issues among young people, but we see it with addiction problems that are rising, particularly the heroin addiction that's happening, which is another issue to address. So the important thing is, number 1, covering it, number 2, talking about it like any other disease, and making sure that families have the support they need to be able to treat it within their families.
Kathleen's comments are very well said and certainly right to the point. Mental health is a major issue across America, and we've got to really dig in, be empathetic, understanding, and apply the resources to it. If we don't apply the resources, if we don't apply the attention to it, we're not going to make that progress. But it's something that cannot be ignored, it needs to be surfaced, and we need to work toward long-term solutions. Too often in government, they're focused on short-term solutions, but we need to focus long-term with our budgeting and money allocation of funds.
Thank you.
As a father of 3 young girls, I think about this every day. I watch them, I see how they grow, I think about the conflicts they have. Now, personally, when I had my surgery 2 years ago, it was neurosurgery, went well, it was to remove a benign tumor. But for 6 weeks, I was in a fog. And I walked around every day in a fog, not certain about how I was going to get through that day. Fortunately, I had the systems in place to protect me. I had my employer keeping my job warm. I had my wife, my daughters, my parents, all taking care of me. We really need to make sure that we're taking care of everybody. Now, the government is not the nanny state. It can't do everything for everyone, but what it can do is promote policies that ensure that we're keeping families whole and strong and people feeling connected.
Thank you.
I think we have to stop describing the problem as if it's somebody else's problem, and I think we need to start doing something about it. Well, that's what we did here in Maryland. That's what we stepped up to the issues of mental health and recognized that, one, we were not funding the programs. We know what are the services that are needed, but we were underfunding them. Secondly, we also mandated coverage of mental health by our health insurance policies. That's the kind of knowledge and experience that you require. We can all sit up here and describe and empathize about the problem, but unless you know it and you've targeted and you've looked and implemented solutions, then it's not worth a hill of beans. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
Well, I support increased funding for NIH, and part of that rationale is to address mental health issues. But two specific points. First, postpartum depression. 1 out of 5 women suffer from postpartum depression after they give birth, and this is a topic that still has not received the national attention that it deserves. In fact, my wife and I brought a bill to the Maryland legislature 14 years ago and made some progress with that. The second issue is the criminal justice system. There's no doubt that there is systematic racism against African Americans, especially African American young males. But we need investment to help African American families, especially young males, in the mental health area in order to deal with the racism that is against them.
Thank you. Mr. Bolin.
I have been blessed to be married to an African American woman, president and CEO of the National Education Association Foundation for 6 years, and been a caregiver to her mother with Alzheimer's after being a stay-at-home dad to our daughter. Before I was widowed in 2007, I cared for 20 years for my wife, who was on 14 medications and suffered from what's called polypharmacy, which is what it sounds like. And I'm very interested in non-pharmacologic approaches because of the severe mental effects of taking so many drugs. And I've been proud to be a member of the Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs because of my work with the David Lynch Foundation on a non-pharmacological treatment for post-traumatic stress for our veterans.
Thank you. Mr. Juwando.
Thank you. You judge a country and a society by how it takes care of the least of these. And in this area with mental health, we haven't stepped up. There's states that are doing good things, but if you think about who our homeless are, who are in our prisons and our jails, our returning veterans who are struggling, we haven't stepped up. And it's an embarrassment for this country, and we need to make sure we invest in the research dollars, but also the funding for mental health services. Because as has been said, we know what works. We know we need to update laws so that families know what to do when someone's impacted in their family, and where they take them, and what are the rules and how long they can stay in a facility. All that needs to be upgraded, and it starts with making sure it's a priority for us as a nation, and that's what I'll do in Congress.
Thank you.
Okay, why don't we switch gears a little bit and take a question from our audience, and we certainly appreciate the questions coming in. I have 8 great-grandchildren. Do you have a plan to pay off the national debt of almost $20 trillion so it will not be a burden unto them? Let's start with Mr. Trong.
How many trillion is it?
According to the person in the audience, it's 20 trillion. And
David can take care of that.
yeah. Well, let's respond to how you handle that.
I've done okay in business, but 20 trillion, that's not happening. Wow.
Where would you start?
Yeah, but you start slowly, you start incrementally. I mean, without question, we've got to figure out how to stop spending money that we don't have. I mean, I've worked in business for 30 years. I do budgets every single year, over and over, and you can't spend what you don't have. It's that simple. But Congress doesn't seem to get that. So it's going to take some attack on the revenue side. People like myself, we got to pay more taxes. That's easy. And it's going to take an attack on the cost side. Hillary Clinton has a lot of great ideas in her plan, and working with challenging what's out there right now. We can't just accept all these costs because they were in last year's budget. That doesn't mean they should be in this year's budget. But as a CEO, attacking costs, asking the right questions, having the curiosity, that's the key.
Thank you. Mr. Rubin.
So the sad truth is that we were paying down the debt in 2000. I was a civil servant then. We all remember it wasn't that long ago. And then we had the Bush tax cuts. And then we had a war, a couple of wars, unpaid for, $1 trillion. We will not get into new $1 trillion wars if I'm in Congress. I fought against us doing that on Iran for 8 years as an activist and a senior official to make sure that we did not use our military on misadventures to blow a hole in our budget. That's how we stop the bleeding, and then we move into the defense budget and the revenue side as well to get the job done.
Thank you. The Sol Gutierrez.
I think that there is a very nice and clear solution for the debt, and it's sitting in the Pentagon wasteful spending. I belong to a group of legislative women, and it's called WILWAN. I urge you to go to the website. And every year we look at the budget, and especially the Pentagon budget, and come up with recommendations of programs, weapon systems that absolutely do not need to be continually funded. That's where I would go for the money first, and we can start balancing our budget and having increased discretionary spending. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
It's a huge issue. I just had a book published called Leveraging, a political, economic, and societal framework. The whole book started on the premise of we became very over-leveraged, and that led to the economic crisis. So I've been working on this issue for years from a financial perspective, from a political perspective, from an international perspective. So there is no simple solution to a problem that we've been dealing with for decades. But to start, the Democrats and the Republicans must come up with a better budget each year, which has a smaller deficit. Time.
Thank you. Mr. Bowling.
I agree with Anna Sol about the Pentagon. I also agree with the Institute of Medicine that says we waste $700 billion a year on unnecessary medical care. We should attack that. That's a big number. But most importantly, our tax revenues are falling short because the middle class is underpaid. In 1914, the Ford Motor Company, under the direction of James Couzens, doubled the wages of their workers overnight. Today, the reincarnation of James Couzens is a guy named Nick Hanauer. On my website, under Income and Equality, you'll see a billionaire who knows how to fix the economy.
That's done. Thank you.
Great question. I have 3 daughters under 5, and I'm in my mid-30s. I am the definition of the crunch generation who will inherit this debt, but who are also burdened with the high cost of childcare, with student loan debt, and taking care of an elderly parent. Here's a novel idea. Let's send someone to Congress who's dealing with the challenges that American people are facing, and they'll be more responsible with money. What do? We need the right priorities. We need to invest. There is some part of investment here. We need to invest in our infrastructure. When we built the interstate highway, it created jobs in interstate commerce. So there is some investing in green jobs in the energy economy. But we also need to equal the playing field and makes our tax system more fair.
Thank you. Ms. Matthews.
During the economic downturn, the most important thing we needed to do was stimulate our economy, and we did that. Now that we have done that, we're starting to see the debt rise again, and so it's suddenly on everybody's radar again. I think you can have progressive policies that improve the economic security of American families, but also be able to write down the debt if you do the smart budgeting. First of all, as you just heard, if you raise wages, more people will be paying taxes at higher rates. So that's a good thing. People get higher wages, the government gets more money to be able to put towards progressive programs. But you also have to close loopholes, things like the carried interest. The carried interest that lets hedge fund managers and private equity people pay a much lower tax than you're paying. We've got to close those kind of loopholes for corporations and different individuals, and that will start to raise the revenues we need to be able to pay down this debt.
Thank you. All right, a few of you had mentioned defense spending during that last question, so let's stick on that topic. If elected, what actions would you take to control defense spending? And let's start with Mr. Rubin.
Thank you. As the only person who served in a senior position on national security issues, I've been fortunate to have seen what it means up close and personal to have defense budgets go awry. 2/3 of our budget is off limits. It's mandatory. 1/3 is discretionary. Of that, 60% goes to national security. We're estimating that it will cost $1.4 trillion to build an F-35 jet that still does not work. We're spending between 60 to 70 billion a year on nuclear weapons and related infrastructure. These are weapons we will never use, certainly not against terrorists, while our troops in the field don't get the body armor they need. There are tremendous cost savings available to us to ensure that we're saving money and investing properly in fighting the wars of the 21st century, not the Cold War. And that money is there for the taking. We just have to do the oversight that is necessary to get it.
Thank you.
I'm going to make him a member of the Will Wan Women's Legislators Group. That's exactly the focus that we have with historic perspective. We've seen the Pentagon budget increase and increase, and what is really shameful is that it's almost off limits to talk about it. The spending for wars are off budget. There is a slush fund that is used and is using all of our taxpayer funding, and there's no oversight, there's no transparency. That's where I would start.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
Well, we live during a very dangerous time in world history. I'm a Democrat, but I really don't think the dominant question now is what should we do to control defense spending. I really think that the dominant question is what do we need to spend to make America safe and to address problems that arise. Now, I'm the only candidate on this platform who was opposed to the Iran nuclear deal. I am very uneasy about ISIS and what they are doing in the Middle East. I think we have to be asking the question, what do we need to do, to create peace? I don't think the question is how to control defense spending. What do we need to spend? If it's a little more or less each year, that's not really the issue. It is a very dangerous time, and we need to think very responsibly about it.
Thank you. Mr. Bowling.
I'm a great believer in the power of stories and the power of example, and even sometimes the power of shaming people. And with regard to the defense budget, there's a fantastic book by Dan Senor and Saul Singer that I'll be happy to share with the title with anybody who wants to know about it after this, that talks about the Israeli Defense Forces, which are incredibly flat. They're not bloated at all. And because no one in Congress will ever speak up against Israel, they would be a fantastic example to shame the Pentagon over its bloated situation and say, why can't we be more like Israel?
Thank you.
We have to start with saying that there's going to be no wars of choice. Because you think about why defense spending is so high. They have to rile up people's fear, so people like Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, and we are in a dangerous world, but that's how you get the defense spending. We didn't just wake up and we were there. People got people scared of how we are, and so we need to understand that I'm very proud of the president. We came in and tried to rehabilitate the horrible reputation we had in the global world as a result of the decision to go into Iraq. And so we need to look at that as a foreign policy question, and then you can stop giving the Pentagon things they're not even asking for. There's many things that are built that they don't even want, but it all starts with our approach to foreign policy. Hopefully we can talk more than a minute about that later.
Thank you.
The United States has played a really important role in keeping the world safe and as peaceful as can be. We've been the leader, and I think we will and need to continue to be the leader of that. But we don't need to carry the burden alone. We've got to be smart about new alliances. In the past, we had alliances with NATO. We've got to create alliances with East Asian and South Asian countries, with Sunni Muslim countries, and we've got to share the burden of keeping the world more peaceful. And so I think that by sharing the burden, suddenly you take a look at the costs that we had to bear a little differently. We also have to be thinking about the new threats, cybersecurity, investing in the things of the future that make us vulnerable. Terrorism, cybersecurity would be things where I think you make new investment as you look at old legacy systems and say, it's time to phase them out.
Thank you.
Yeah, the point on cybersecurity is absolutely a great point. I met with Vice Admiral Mike McConnell, and he was the head of the NSA, former then DNI, and he believes without any question the most danger we have is cyber attack. The Chinese, what they're doing to steal our economic secrets right now, and economic power then equates into military and political power. So safe is where it starts, but we also can't abandon our global leadership. America is the leader. We can't just step to the side and say our head's in the sand. That will not work. But we also have to support our military categorically. My dad fought in World War II, and we've got great, awesome people in our military, and we need to make sure we support them, but challenge their weapon systems, challenge the spending. Don't just accept it.
Thank you.
Okay, next question is from Mr. Rubin.
No.
No, you had, okay,
Okay,
Saul Gutierrez.
Although,
I'm sorry.
can I ask a question? Is it possible for us to make a secondary point if we feel that a critique was made of something we made earlier?
Yes.
Okay, it's on Iran.
Okay.
Thank you. A critique was made that the Iran deal was not good for American security, and I would argue that at this moment in time, the last thing we need to be doing is ripping up the agreement with Iran, because we will be left with a horrible choice. Iran will restart its nuclear program and move to get the bomb. So we can let that happen, not a good idea. Or we will have to go in militarily, a horrible idea. And that will not stop them from getting the bomb. So let's make sure that's clear. We do not need to have more military engagements that waste, treasure, and harm people's lives when we have diplomatic agreements that work. And that's what we have on Iran.
Thank you.
Could I speak to Iran as well?
Yes.
So my Iranian friends tell me that the Death to America chanters is almost entirely an act, that we should not be misled, that the vast majority of Iranians, unlike the religious leadership, love America. They have cousins and family members here, and it would be a great mistake for us to let the hardliners, who are a tiny minority in Iran, although they're in power, trigger us to do the wrong thing there.
Thank you.
Well, that was a response to me.
So you get to
I mean,
make a
so
comment.
can I?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I didn't say we should tear up the Iran deal now. I said I was opposed to the Iran deal, when the decision was made. So just to clarify that, I'm not saying we should
What is
tear
your
it up
position now?
right now. Well, I'll tell you, I read in the Washington Post, was it today, that Iran has already, they are testing ballistic missiles, and even though it's somewhat outside, right, of the body of the Iran nuclear deal, they're not supposed to be doing that due to other agreements we have
That's still being
with
debated.
them. Now, last summer, Ord Kittry, a non-nuclear proliferation lawyer, wrote a nice piece in the Wall Street Journal in August, and he said 200 times in American history, Congress has, rejected an agreement or a treaty, and that didn't mean it would lead to war. You go back and you get a better agreement. So all I'm saying is we could have rejected the deal, gone back and tried to get a better agreement. The way the administration presented this was a false choice.
Thank you.
It's either the
That's not
agreement or
accurate.
war.
Thank you.
I don't believe that was the
I
choice.
think we've given Mr. Anderson an opportunity to clarify that point, and point well taken. Let's move forward, okay? Next question is, we've heard a lot about Wall Street and big banks, particularly now that the Democratic discussion has moved to that during this election cycle. Investment bankers, hedge fund managers, insurance companies, we all understand or believe that they caused the Great Recession of 2007 and 2008, yet few people went to jail. What would you do if you are elected to tighten the regulatory restrictions on financial institutions to ensure that that does not occur again?
Well, I absolutely would not support the backsliding that we have seen in weakening the laws that we pass. Glass-Steagall, the Barney's, the Dodd-Frank bills. We need to have these regulations, but we also need to enforce them. And I think what we're seeing with the experience from Elizabeth Warren, who was a champion in this direction and yet was disseminated, and she had to stand up and run for office. And look at the voice and the experience that she brings. I believe that that is the leadership and the direction that we need to have in Congress. We can pass the regulations, close the loopholes, ensure that there are punishments, and that these are implemented, that these are enforced, because we're just crossing our arms and let it continue to happen. We have not yet learned a lesson, and that's what I think we need to do in Congress.
Thank you. Let's move on, Mr. Anderson.
Clearly, one of the chief causes of the economic crisis, in addition to greed, was the repealing of the Glass-Steagall Act, which did separate consumer banking from investment banking. So that needs to be reinstated. That is basically a New Deal concept, and so that is key. Secondly, yes, we do need to call the Wall Street barons and prosecute where necessary. So yes, at an individual level, we have to be much more kind of responsible in terms of addressing those who caused immense harm. But at the federal, congressional level, we have to repeal, get it back, get the law back, to keep those two functions separate, investment and consumer banking.
Thank you. Ms. Bowley?
I agree completely with David that we need to bring back Glass-Steagall. We also need to end the situation where regulated executives sit on the boards of the entities that regulate them. That's a clear conflict of interest, and it's going on today, and it's tolerated. Now, why the Department of Justice that prosecuted 1,000 people during the savings and loan scandal, prosecuted almost nobody, I don't know. But there have been many companies that have been fined repeatedly, and one idea that's been put forward is that any company that is fined repeatedly, if you're not going to prosecute the executives criminally, make them pay part of those penalties rather than passing those on to their shareholders. And I think whenever they have skin in the game, they'll behave differently.
Thank you.
This is part of the problem. This is why people feel that the system's rigged and special interests are running everything and telling them, common day Americans, that they have no voice. And I think you see both sides tapping into that on the Republican end and the Democratic side, and because it's true. You did have the largest fines ever negotiated by Attorney General Holder from these companies, but it's not enough. Not enough people. One guy, middle-level guy, went to jail, and so we should have criminally prosecuted them. Dodd-Frank was a good start, but it's not enough. One of the things that came out of that law was the Consumer Protection Financial Bureau, which needs to be strengthened. Republicans have repeatedly tried to pull that back. And we need to break up the big banks. The banks that failed and created this disaster are bigger than they were before. And if you think that that is a bad thing like I do, vote for me for Congress and we'll go fix it.
Thank you.
If you haven't seen The Short Game, you should see it. It's a great documentary because it shows exactly what happened and it shows you who suffered. It was the American people who suffered out of that financial crisis. Dodd-Frank has tried to address a lot of those issues, and I've had a chance to talk to both Chris Dodd, the senator who sponsored it, and Barney Frank, the congressman. They believe they made some good initial progress, and that the way forward is to strengthen that law and to actually have criminal prosecutions of individuals and not just fines on financial institutions that are not in compliance. And so I think we build on Dodd-Frank going forward and trying to keep the American people in the forefront on all of this. They were the ones that really suffered in the last instance, and we got to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Thank you.
The Consumer Protection Agency that
Thank you.
Elizabeth Warren has supported is a really good first
Thank you.
direction.
There's no question Dodd-Frank is a big step in the right direction. I agree with Kathleen. We need to continue to build on it. We need to continue to get more teeth in it. What we have is a revolving door of people in industry, Wall Street, and then they head to politics. Then they go back to Wall Street and politics. So they are really one and the same. And that's the corrosive effect of money in politics. The special interest, the lobbyist, the PACs. And that's one of the reasons why my wife and I decided when I'm going to run for office not to take PAC money, not to take lobby money, and take no donations over $10.
Thank you.
Well, I was going to say one thing, but I'm going to say a different thing, which is, David, with all due respect, you donated $160,000 to Republican legislators to move government policy in your company's direction. And so you know a lot about this. I don't. My wife and I have both been government servants basically our whole careers. We're in this for public service. And I'll tell you, I worked for honorable senators, Tom Harkin and Frank Laudenberg, who were senior appropriators, and they saw what happened when people would sneak rioters into omnibus bills in the dark of night to shut down the SEC's ability to prosecute, to go after the criminals, to go after Wall Street. That's something I know that we're going to be lacking when Barbara Mikulski is gone, and I promise I will go for the Appropriations Committee if you support me, and we will fix that.
I started it.
She started.
Do you want me to go again? I'll be glad to.
No, we're at the other end of the table.
Yep. All right.
Could I get a response back on that one question?
Yes.
We've certainly donated money. I've certainly donated money for 20 years to Republicans in different state races. If you want to get something done in Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, you better look a Republican in the eye and figure out how to make something happen. But if we want to just put our head in the sand, that's another opportunity. But I have thousands of employees in those states, and we've done good pro-consumer laws like Sunday sales, the ability to sell craft beer, etc.
Excuse me, I got to say something on that, because this is too important of an issue, and I like David personally, but when you look him in the eye, you don't have to slide him a $100,000 check below the table. And the idea that that's the way we have to operate is the problem with our politics today. It's why you have gridlock in Washington. And I think what's missing, moneyed interests are not what's missing. The wealthy and the well-connected are represented. 53% of Congress are millionaires, the highest number ever in our nation's history. We don't need to send anyone else like that to Congress. God bless how well you did in business, but that's not what we need. What's missing is people that are dealing with the things that working families are dealing with, and you need someone there who's going to fight for them each and every day.
Thank you.
Do you clap?
All right. We'll do our next question. We'll start the head of the table again with Mr. Anderson. This one's regarding gun violence. As more of our American citizens die each year as a result of gun violence, what specific proposal do you favor to increase gun safety?
Well, it's a huge issue. We certainly want to we need to insist that people can't get a hold of automatic rifles and high-capacity magazines. But on Capitol Hill, when you're dealing with the Republicans, you have to note that they have not been very interested to work with Democrats on getting major legislation. So what I propose is a kind of baby step to start dealing with the Republicans. Something the Democrats have to do, and we don't do, is to make it clear to the Republicans that we're not trying to repeal the Second Amendment. It is one of the 10 amendments. It's one of the early ones. We have to acknowledge that there is a right to a handgun, as we can interpret the Second Amendment, and you have a right to a hunting rifle. You got to psychologically put the Republicans at ease on that. and then you got to work hard on preventing you don't need an automatic rifle to shoot a duck, okay?
Thank you.
But you have to work with the Republicans because we're not getting anywhere. So let
Thank
them
you.
know that we still accept the Second Amendment as a starting point.
Mr. Bowling.
So I think it's about 100 million Americans own guns. About 5 million belong to the NRA, where they quote selectively only the part of the Second Amendment that doesn't include the militia reference. So most gun owners are not members of the NRA. And if we want to make progress, we need to, first of all, talk about gun safety, not gun control. And the state of Washington, I think, is leading the way. Following the successful reduction in cigarette smoking by heavy taxation, they are putting heavy taxation on the purchase of ammunition and guns. And so far, their efforts have survived court challenges. And I think it's a very interesting way by using economic forces to try to reduce the tremendous volume of guns in our society.
Thank you. This table is close.
All right.
Mr. Juanda.
So there's more guns than people in the United States. 300 million, right? The guns aren't going away. And that's okay, but we need to change how they're used in the culture. Canada, they have a lot of guns. A lot of places they have guns, but they don't have the same levels of gun violence, okay? It should be just as hard or as easy, depending on how good of a driver you are, to get a driver's license as it is to get a gun license. And that was changed here in Maryland, thanks to some of the state legislators here. You have to have training and things now before you get guns. So gun safety is an important thing. We need to close gun show loopholes. This is a very personal issue to me. We need to crack down on gun traffickers. The gun that killed one of my best friends was likely trafficked into Maryland. This was when I was 12 years old. I lost one of my best friends to gun violence. We were in the same schools. So I know from a personal way the effect of gun violence can have on a community. So in addition to cracking down on traffickers, we need to keep them out of the hands of domestic abusers, and of course have universal background checks, which all NRA, or most NRA people actually support.
Thank you.
So 300 million guns, and yet the number of ATF agents who enforce the current law hasn't gone up at all. So we need to fund the ATF and make sure that they can at least enforce the current law. Then we need to close the loopholes on gun purchases, and I would extend those background checks to gun ammunition purchases. But we also have to address the issues of mental health concurrent with this, because 60% of all gun shootings and deaths are in suicides. And so as we treat mental illness as a regular chronic health disease and make sure that we have funding for that, we can also address the horrible number of suicides. I know about this all too well. Too many nights on the 11 o'clock news, I led the newscast with another gun shooting. A suicide,
Thank you.
two young men against each other, and we've got to stop this cycle of violence.
Thank you.
The mental health epidemic is just horrible, and that is where 60% are, and that needs to get stopped. I couldn't agree more. At the same time, it talks about the corrosive effects of dollars, the NRA with their lobbying dollars. At the same time, 87% of Americans think we need tighter background checks, trigger locks, things like that. Lots of common sense fixes that we all agree on, yet nothing gets done. So that speaks to working across the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, incrementally, small step at a time, gun safety, not gun abolition.
Thank you.
So all the ingredients are there to unlock this, except for the actual political calculations of the politicians that are sitting in office. If 9 out of 10 Americans support reasonable background checks, why don't we have it? Well, we have gerrymandering. And so it forces people to run for Congress towards the base on the right in this instance, and they will not touch gun control or gun safety legislation. That has to change. That means we have to unlock the way we do politics in this country. One of the key ways to do it, of course, is to build coalitions as well with people living in those districts. I'm experienced in running campaigns. To build a coalition to support diplomacy with Iran, it takes years, it's hard work, but we have allies across the country who we need to help empower to win the political fights in their districts.
Well, this is an issue that I'm very close to, because in Maryland, we have become the model of legislation to control guns, to reduce violence and increase safety. Most of the laws that regulate the sale and the licensing of guns are state level. So at the federal level, you can do a lot of things, but really, I think that we need to look at what is happening on the ground, and that's what we did. I have 2 pieces of my own legislation in the Maryland gun law. I reduced the number of bullets in a cartridge to no more than 10. We don't need to have 20, 30, 100 bullets in a cartridge. I also mandated that lost guns needed to be reported within 48 hours. The police today are thanking us for that law because they can now trace guns to illicit use.
Thank you.
There's a lot more that I could talk about.
Thank you.
1 minute's not enough for that subject, I'm sorry.
Okay, did Mr. Anderson respond
Yes,
to that?
he's starting, so.
You started. Okay, Mr. Bowling.
Yes.
We've heard the news and we've seen this current election process continue. That process has taken on an increased significance since the death of Chief Justice Scalia. If elected, what recommendations would you make to President Obama to move forward with the appointment of a Supreme Court justice, his nominee, and to ensure that that individual gets a hearing, and to prevent the Supreme Court justice from becoming a political tool?
Well, first, I think I better act before I get elected, because there's only going to be about 15 days between my swearing in and President Obama's last day in office.
Yeah.
So I think you have to find the pressure point in these situations, and the pressure point seems to be Chuck Grassley in Iowa. He controls the Judiciary Committee. And I think one of the nominees that's being considered is a very attractive woman judge from Iowa that Senator Grassley has publicly praised at great length in an earlier appointment. I don't know if she will be President Obama's choice, but you need to find the way to put the screws tightly to the ones who control the agenda, and the person there is Senator Chuck Grassley.
Thank you. Mr. Durando.
Great question. The Supreme Court, as you know, is so important. First, we have to call on all of us in this room, and if you haven't yet, write a letter, call on your member, your senators, other senators from other states to do their job. In the Congress, the Constitution is very clear. Article 2, the President shall appoint, and the Senate advises and consents. That's not a may or maybe, or you can if you want, or wait till the next president. So that's number one. Number two, I think the President, and he'll nominate someone next week, should nominate a progressive woman to the court. I think a woman of color, preferably. That would be my pick if I was president. I don't know if that was the question, but if you're listening, President Obama, that's my recommendation. And then my wife is leading this work at the Center for American Progress. We need to make sure that all these Senate Republicans who are up this year in this election cycle, who are vulnerable in swing states, that they feel the pressure and they hear from their constituents, because that's the only way we're going to get a vote and actually get someone across the finish line, which we need to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Matthews.
I have heard so much outrage on the campaign trail about this issue. People cannot believe that the Senate would prevent the president from his constitutional right to nominate a justice. And I think the president is doing the right thing. He's ignoring the Senate that is saying that, and he's doing the vetting of multiple candidates right now. He's putting the lists of people together that he could potentially nominate, and he's going to move forward. And if he continues to do that, and all of you share your outrage, as we share our outrage every day on the campaign trail, I think the pressure will be there for him to get that consideration.
Thank you.
There's no question the president should continue on the movement of naming a justice. It's his right. There's no precedence for this. This really speaks to the divisiveness, the ugliness that's taken over politics. It's just wrong. That's the Constitution, and they're not even going to follow it. But it's getting worse with the Republican debates. What you see with Trump and Cruz is a whole nother level of incivility, of ugliness, and we need to stop this and think again and work together as Americans.
Thank you.
So this is just one more example of the Republicans delegitimizing Barack Obama as the president of the United States. We've seen it for years. Here it goes again. I would recommend that the president put pressure back on them and appoint, as Will says, a very progressive judge to basically make it a campaign issue as well as get the right person on the bench. Republicans should try to filibuster the Supreme Court and see how that reacts, see how people like the idea of getting Hillary Clinton in. I've endorsed Hillary, so I'll say getting Hillary Clinton into the White House, and then seeing the effects of that down ballot into the Senate and into the House, and hopefully flip both chambers as well.
Thank you.
A Supreme Court appointment is not an option. The Constitution is very clear. Can you imagine if President Obama said, "Oh, yes, Senate, I understand. I'm not going to do anything about this"? He would be violating the law. This is outrageous that the Senate can dare to take this position and feel that they're entitled to be that. I don't know where the media is. I don't know where we as voters are in listening to this position and not being outraged. I absolutely support President Obama moving forward quickly, and I would suggest that he name another woman. We need to be equitable on the court.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
3 days after Justice Scalia died, I issued a press statement, and I said that President Obama needs to meet with Senator McConnell and have a negotiation. And they need to understand that each side is trying to get their person on the court. And each side is at great risk, because one side would win if they fight it out. And that is going to continue to have negative impact on our electoral process, because this year coming up now is totally theatrical with what's going on. They needed to agree to a centrist, someone who we don't know where they would stand on the hard issues. That would be in the best interest of the country. And as the realistic progressive and the least liberal member of this panel, that is what is in the best interest of the country, not to fight for the liberal justice. Fight for the center. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Go ahead. All right. Our next question. Rural communities. Yes.
Yes.
Rural communities across Maryland, including those here in Carroll County, and the rest of the United States are experiencing an epidemic in opioid drug abuse, which I think some of you have already mentioned. What can be done to address this problem, and do you think it's a criminal justice problem or a health issue? We'll start with Mr. Jawando.
It's a great question, and it's something that is, I'll answer your question directly, it's a health issue. That's number one. You've seen some bipartisan agreement on this. You saw Chris Christie passionately talk about this during his campaign, and I think he was right then. It's a shame that it had to get this way before we started recognizing that drug abuse is a substance abuse issue that needs to be treated, not criminalized. I don't have to tell you that we have more people in prison than any other country in the world, many of them black and brown, many of them for nonviolent drug offenses. And we're spending, talk about where we can save money, we're spending tons of money to incarcerate people and then releasing them and giving them no opportunity. So this issue, I'm glad that it's sparking conversation about how we need to reform our criminal justice system, how we need to look at substance abuse as a treatable thing in line with mental health, and what we're going to need to see is more investment in those issues going forward if we're going to actually address it, because it's a huge problem. I think Governor Hogan has taken decent steps to recognize that, along with some of the other governors, but now we need not talk, we need action.
Thank you. Ms. Matthews.
As part of the war on drugs, there was a shift to try to treat addiction as a criminal problem and not as a health problem. And I think everybody has woken up to the fact that that has created a number of injustices. First of all, people are imprisoned and not treated for their addiction. They get back out in the community and the addiction begins again. So the criminal justice reforms that we've been hearing about here in Maryland and elsewhere that would treat this as getting rid of the mandatory minimum sentences is going to be a good first start. But we also have to take a look at this drug addiction problem. And there's got to be much better training in our medical schools among doctors to understand these drugs. Because doctors don't fully understand what they are prescribing to people, and they don't know and don't explain when they're treating people what the final outcome might be. So that kind of training needs to happen, and the coordination among pharmacies so that people are not shopping around for drugs, which is causing the problem now.
Mr. Trone.
It's really a combination of the two. It's a criminal justice problem coming from what's a really health problem. We need to help and direct health care and health solutions to the area of these opiates. It's decriminalization, certainly of marijuana. We're becoming the world's jailer. 25% of the folks that are in jail in the entire world are in jail here in America, yet we're only 5% of the population. So we've got to directly address this. I've worked with the ACLU in this area in the criminal justice. We founded a committee and created a criminal justice center to look at why so many of our Americans are put in jail, and then what happens when they're in jail. Why aren't we educating, preparing them for reentry to lower our recidivism rates?
Thank you.
Prison is not a halfway house. I have experienced addiction in my family. We see it up close and personal. When I worked for Senator Harkin, I handled his justice programs and went out to Iowa into rural areas and met with meth addicts, women who were in prison. We remember what meth did, and it devastated communities. Fortunately, these women were benefiting from programs to help them get back into society. And this goes to the bigger picture about our priorities on the budget. And frankly, we're not putting enough money into helping people get out of the ditch that they're in many times and on their own 2 feet. We have a lot of people in the government who want to help them. We need to make sure that we're supporting those programs and these people.
Thank you.
Well, as a Democratic legislator, I applaud Governor Hogan for making this a priority and bringing attention and focus and funding to this issue. Yes, it's a health issue. It's addiction, and it has some mental health issues, but you know, I see it as a bigger issue. It's poverty, it's economic, it's lack of opportunities, it's lack of educational opportunities. So we need to do things that look at the problem on the whole. We're doing that in Maryland. We have the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Commission with recommendations that we're looking at right now. We had a bill hearing last week that lasted till midnight on this issue because there are things that we can do, but you have to have the will and the knowledge to go forward and do this.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
Right. On its face, this is a criminal justice and health issue. I agree with Anna. The deeper issue is really economic. Now, let me tell you my proposal for Frederick and Carroll counties. We need to bring more jobs to these 2 counties, and here's one way to do it. There's the concept of the federal emergency relocation centers going back to World War II, and that was accelerated after 9/11. Federal agencies, you know, have centers that they build, sometimes above ground, sometimes underground, and they keep expanding, and there's a dispersal theme in the federal government that's trying to move them out further. We have a number of centers and agencies in Montgomery County. We need to move more federal agencies up to Carroll and Frederick County and not just be trying to solve the transportation problem down to Montgomery. We have to solve that problem. But if we bring some jobs up here with the federal government, then we don't have to solve the transportation issue. We can put people who are addicted to work using basically
Thank you.
stimulus programs.
Mr. Bowling.
I agree 100%. You know, the rise in drug addiction corresponded with the decline of middle incomes. We need to strengthen the middle class. I'm married to an African-American CEO. Get your head around that for a second. And we had a very uncomfortable conversation on this. And she very gently said, Dan, please don't be offended, but I can't help but notice that we started to recognize this as a health problem when rural white people began to be the ones suffering.
He did that because I'm married to an African-American vice president.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question before we go to closing statements.
Yes, we do, and this will be for Mrs. Matthews, I think, right?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Matthews, I moved my family here from Montgomery County in 1977. Since that time, I have found the citizens of Carroll County have very unique concerns and interests. If elected, what measures would you take to ensure that that small piece of the pie that you're representing is adequately addressed?
So this is a beautiful area. I understand why you moved up here. Just driving through it on this gorgeous day, the quality of life here is wonderful, but this area needs more jobs. It needs more opportunity for young people who are trying to figure out what do they do after they finish high school and college. And that's what any member of Congress needs to be focused on. We need to be focused on the next generation. And what are the things that we're doing to create more economic security today for families so that they can educate their children and move them towards jobs for the future? We need to be looking at new biomedical corridors, and that could include both Carroll and Frederick County, as we take what's being invented at NIH and solved at NIH and actually bring it to market up here. We need to look at clean energy. This area, it would be a wonderful place to have clean energy plants, whether it's solar, wind, new jobs for the future for young people to move into. So that's the focus. It's focusing on what we do today for jobs and opportunity for the next generation.
Thank you. Mr. Trone.
As the only candidate that has an office in Carroll County, in Westminster here, I absolutely going to pay a lot of attention to Carroll County, maintain an office in Carroll County. It's a lot like where I grew up. I've spent hundreds of hours driving John Deere equipment. I saw a Finch dealer the other day, and I recognized the name. I get that part of life. I get it well. At the end of the day, we need more entrepreneurship because it's about jobs, and it's about education, and then more jobs. Places like Nora Brakes, where they've actually created more and more jobs. I took a tour of that recently, fantastic. And we got to support the people. Places like the ARC, fantastic work they do with the disabled. And we need to support that on a long-term basis.
Thank you. Mr. Rubin.
Constituent service is the way it's typically described. Constituent service has to be the first order of business for any member of Congress to ensure that they are hearing directly from the constituents on what's needed. My first job in government was as an intern for then Senator Kerry, doing Social Security and Medicare work to help his constituents with their problems. So we have to have that addressed, period. Number two, of course, is getting the policies right. And that does mean ensuring that we're investing in the 21st century economy and bringing it up to here to Westminster like it's already happening. Westminster is becoming a technology hub. It is investing. And it's to ensure that the federal government, under the hood of all these decisions, has a member of Congress who knows how to partner with these communities here to get things done for them with the federal government.
Thank you.
Delegate Susan Krebs represents you well. She came before our Appropriations Committee. I've been serving on the Appropriations Committee now 10 years, and she gave me an insight of what is the current lack of ability to grow and to invest and to make Carroll County what was moving in the right direction. And she has come with issues such as the lack of funding for school construction and the loss of students, that you're shrinking rather than growing. That has to be changed, but a lot is what your own government and local policies are able to do. If you're not having that tax base, then it's going to be very hard for you to be able to grow. I think understanding what are the needs of your community and responding to them is what is going to be important for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
Carroll County and Frederick County are both neglected by the Montgomery County liberal establishment. I have already proven in this campaign by making 40 trips, 26 to Frederick and 14 here to 4 different towns, knocking on Democratic doors each time, that I would be responsive to the citizens because I've been doing it. Now, secondly, I am the most qualified of everyone up here to be responsive to your needs. Why? Because my values have more in common with the families and the seniors in Carroll County than they do with the Montgomery County liberal establishment. So I will hear what you're saying, and I will be responsive to your needs. I will represent all 3 counties, but I will not neglect these 2 counties, and that's why I've already made 40 trips up here to meet with voters at their
Thank you.
doorsteps.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bowley.
Well, as the husband of the CEO of the NEA Foundation, I would take my wife's advice at how I might help the teachers in Carroll County in their negotiations, which just yesterday, I think, they were rejected by 347 to 2, if I'm not mistaken. I would also look at this issue of the widening of Route 32, and whether that's the smarter way to go, or whether we should set up federal telecommuting centers so people don't even have to drive down to Washington to work. I would also want to commend Carroll County's exemplary treatment of veterans, which I've become aware of by serving on the Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs, and use my knowledge and your success as an example for other counties statewide and how to properly honor and serve veterans.
Thank you.
This is an easy one. It was mentioned having an office. I have a home office in Carroll County, and it's owned by my mom in Manchester. So you can guarantee that me and my daughters will be up here. And I think we could learn a lot from places like Carroll County. You know, my mom grew up on a farm in Hays, Kansas. My dad in Nigeria, and this place is a great place. What do we do to keep it and improve it? How about centers of excellence at McDaniel and at our community colleges on the key issues that we're trying to face, like cybersecurity and green jobs? Let's invest in that. Let's bring jobs here. I think economic opportunity is a part of it. But I can promise you I'll always be up here. And then finally, let's invest in small business. Both my parents, my stepdad's here too, have small businesses in this county. One's Ella's Bake Shop, so check that out. And one's a senior transportation service.
Thank you.
Let's invest in our small businesses as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think at this point, we're going to allow each of the candidates to have 2 minutes for a closing statement, and we'll start with Ms. Matthews.
Well, thank you. I'm an optimist, and I'm an optimist because tonight, on a Wednesday night, you're here. You're here because you care about our democracy. You care about trying to make it work. I'm an optimist because today at McDaniel College, I met the most amazing students asking the best questions about foreign policy, domestic policy, and where the jobs of the future are going to be for their generation. And so I think if you listen to all of us here on the stage, you're not going to see a whole lot of difference between us on a lot of these issues. I think you have to figure out who is going to be most effective at pulling that agenda forward in the current Congress, which is a Republican-controlled Congress that has been seized by gridlock. I'd like you to look at my experience, broad experience understanding the issues, what you have been doing and going through for decades here as a reporter, because I've been in your community, in your schools, in your hospitals, in your homes, telling those stories, listening to you and telling your story. But I also bring the experience of a problem solver, somebody who worked in business where you have to get things done. Gridlock is not an option. You got to figure out how you create coalitions, how you get people to work together. Sometimes the perfect is the enemy of the good, but getting things done that are going to improve the lives of the American people. We've talked about the issues where we need to do that. We need to make our community safer with smart gun safety laws. We need to make our families stronger and bring back the middle class, which is shrinking as a result of wage stagnation and policies that have not let families thrive. And we got to be smart about the planet. We got to protect this planet for future generations and not burn it up. We've got to be able to fund this with things like a carbon tax that can be used to pay for some of these programs, cutting loopholes in corporate tax loopholes. We got to pay for this and be responsible about going forward. We also need more women in Congress. Look at this stage. There are 9 of us normally on the stage, 2 women, and that's about what the U.S. Congress is, 20% women. I think if we have more women's voices in Congress, we'll have a more civil dialogue, we'll get things done, we'll have multiple diverse perspectives.
Thank you.
So I ask you to consider me for that reason, as well as the experience that you've looked at tonight.
Mr. Trone.
At the end of the day, it's not about the next election. It's really about the next generation. That's what we're here for, our children and their children, and how we're going to help them do better than we have done. And that's been the American way for generations and generations and generations. So we have to get focused on who can bring something different, a different approach, a different way to attack Washington, which has clearly failed. 14% approval rating in school, 14% doesn't do too well. My 4 children didn't work, would not work. But we need something different, an approach with a business approach with good progressive values that have worked through my company in 21 states, 5,000 team members, starting with nothing, starting up in Adams County with a farm that failed, and then working harder than anybody and hiring great people, because no one does it alone. We do it with some luck, and we do it with great people, and we've been fortunate to have great people. But that's what we need in Congress, is a different type of person that is there just to do one thing, make a difference. Not take PAC money, not take the lobby money, not be beholden to anybody, but only be beholden to the people in the 8th District, the people of Maryland, and actually the people of America, because that's what we're here for.
Thank you. Mr. Rubin.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. Again, on a Wednesday evening, it's wonderful to have you participating like this. It's an honor to be with my colleagues as well up here talking to you about the issues. I'm a progressive champion who has gotten results in Congress. I'm also a person who's dedicated my life to public service. I started out as a Peace Corps volunteer to take on fights to stop climate change, to help communities in need develop. And that led me to seek a career of peace building and promoting the best policies that we could. And there are many fights up ahead. We have to worry about retirement security. I'm 45. Social Security could be insolvent in 20 years, right when I turn 65. This is a real concern. We have women's health issues and women's rights. My 3 daughters, I do not want any politician to tell them what to do with their own bodies. But it goes beyond that as well, friends. We are in the middle of the most disgusting presidential campaign of our collective lifetimes. There is a fight right now for the soul of the American people and for how we are, not just with ourselves, but with the rest of the world. We have candidates openly speaking about shredding our alliances around the world that have provided us security since World War II. We have candidates speaking about building walls with Mexico to keep people out. We have candidates speaking about kicking out Muslims because of their religion. I won't stand for that. You shouldn't stand for that. But it's not like this came in isolation. This has been a growing trend for well over a decade. We saw its roots in the Bush administration. We've seen it through the delegitimization of President Obama. And what we need is to have people in Congress who know how to take on those fights and win. We need, in many ways, an insurance policy in Congress. Now, I submit that I have been working for years to fight those same forces when I helped to promote diplomacy as a way to deal with Iran and to stop its nuclear program. I've taken on those fights, and with your help and your support, we'll continue to take on those fights together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sol Gutierrez.
Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to come before you and have you hear us, have you hear our opinions, what we're thinking. Because I think you have a very important decision to make on April 26th, or early voting, if you're going to take advantage of that, which was laws that we passed in Maryland to ensure that voters are able to vote. I think this is going to be an important decision for you to make because it is important who represents you, what kind of experience they bring to the table, and how they're going to represent your values and your ideas. What you see in me is what you get. I'm a woman, a Democrat. I was a single mom. I have worked as a systems engineer, a chemist, and I got that opportunity because I think I represent the American dream. I'm from El Salvador. I came as an immigrant, and I was educated in Montgomery County Public Schools that prepared me to become the professional and now the legislator that I have been. That is the American dream that I want everyone to have. I don't want this country to go back to times that I really think are absolutely contrary to who we are as Americans. I'm going to fight to make sure that everyone from birth to our age, I'm a senior, I depend on Social Security, I know what our challenges are, but I have the experience. I think I will bring to you what is necessary in your representative. And remember my name. It's easy to remember. It goes from A to Z. Ana Sol Gutierrez.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
My opponents, especially my old friend Senator Raskin, who's not here now, they speak for a liberal agenda, and it is the Montgomery County liberal agenda. Well, in many ways, I've tried to point out tonight that that's not where I'm coming from. I was there when I was 35. Well, I'm 57 now, and that's not where I am. My family policy, which I started out with, there's no one in this race or any race, so far as I know, who stands up for stay-at-home moms and stay-at-home dads and says that we're going to give $10,000 for a family to put their child in child care. We should give them $10,000 if one of them wants to quit their job and stay home and take care of their own child. That is not a liberal agenda point of view, okay? I held the other view when I wrote my dissertation 25 years ago, but I moved over. Now, I want to say something about Social Security. Another example where you can't say that I sound like them. I think two things. A, we should, and I said this on the doorsteps of 4 towns in Carroll County, we should increase the monthly payments of the 36% of seniors who rely on Social Security for 90 to 100% of their income. There, that's the liberal part of my view, part A. Part B, I agree with the Republicans that we should push back the age eligibility by 2 years. People are living longer, we have better health care. That's not a liberal view. So there's Anderson. I accept both views, and that's not the moderate center either. You see what I just did? I combined a liberal idea and a conservative idea, and it comes from one person. That's the solution. We should be liberal in the short term and help those people who are choosing between food and medicine. But in the long run, my colleagues say, let's lift the cap to $250,000. It'll never happen, okay? I'm a realistic progressive. I've lived in Washington for several decades. It'll never happen. It's not a coherent proposal. I just gave you a proposal that's coherent. Something for the Republicans and something for the Democrats.
Thank you so much for your opinion.
Well, I hadn't heard Dave's prescription until just now, and I love the first part because I'm the only person on this panel who qualifies for Social Security. So a big increase, Dave. Thank you. Okay. All right, 2 of us. So before I founded a cancer immunotherapy company and before I negotiated multi-million-dollar deals for General Electric, before I hired my first 7 employees in my earth shoe store while I was an undergraduate in business school, I rode my bicycle from Toronto to Montreal to Boston. And if I wanted to, I could tell you that I rode my bike from Bethesda here today to impress you, but that would be a lie. But what is not a lie is that we can fix Congress, and it's not me saying it. It's NPR, it's Politico, it's The Atlantic. You can find the links on my webpage. And in addition to being one of the only 2 who qualify for Social Security, I'm the only one who is saying we can fix Congress. And it's not me, not my idea. It's something they've done for 80 years in Nebraska. And it's not the unicameral, it's the nonpartisan part of it. And if you give me your vote, I will empower every Democratic woman in Congress whose bills today are not even being heard because they belong to the minority party. And in our current system, if you're not in the majority, you don't get heard. So, what I'm saying will elicit your skepticism. That's natural. But, you know, maybe the Atlantic and Politico and NPR are right. And you'll find those links on my website. Vote Dan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles and Wayne and Don and the Central Committee and all you all for sitting here. You have definitely been the most polite and quiet audience of the 20 debates that we've had. So I just want to appreciate you all coming out on this night. You know, this country is a great country. I talked about my story a little bit at the beginning. Only here is my story possible. One generation from someone fleeing a civil war in Nigeria, a mom who left the Midwest seeking economic opportunity on the East Coast, two very uniquely American stories. And I'm the product of that, standing here having worked for the first African-American president, the first woman Speaker of the House, great Senator Sherrod Brown, and passed significant legislation in my 10-plus years working on federal policy in the House, in the Senate, in the White House, in the Department of Education. I have a unique set of skills, but I also have a unique set of life experiences. And I think what's missing, not I think, I know what's missing in Congress, are people who understand what working families are going through. And that's a perspective in a race with a lot of great people who are well-intentioned, why I think you need to vote for me. When you talk about childcare, what are the issues we're facing? My wife and I have 3 young daughters. They're on the back of your card. Take a look. They're pretty cute. We pay $2,000 a month for high-quality childcare for them. It's an embarrassment in this country that we do not subsidize childcare. People are going bankrupt. And what happens is you have kids in unsafe settings, and then they start school behind with the achievement gap and opportunity gap. I'm dealing with that. When you talk about student loan debt, the ability for people to pay back loans and enter a job and contribute to the economy, I've got over $160,000. It's in the Washington Post, thanks to Bill Turk in the back, about how much debt we have. When I'm talking about elder care, we take care of my dad who lost his job because he came down with cancer and had to sign him up for Obamacare. Thank God I was able to work on that in the White House. Let's put someone in Congress who knows how to deal with those issues, but also knows how to get something done with Republicans. I've got the unique combination of both legislative and policy experience, but also life experience. And I submit to you that's what's missing. And I'm honored to talk to you tonight, and I hope to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. Don?
Wow. You know, what can I say? I ran into a friend of mine out in the hallway a little bit ago. She happens to be a Republican. And she was very impressed. Okay, she was very impressed with our candidates. So thank you for coming out tonight. She was impressed with our moderators and the questions. So thank you to you guys. And above all, she was impressed with the audience, okay? She said that they don't often see this many people at their events here in Carroll County. So thank you all very much for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. Give yourself a round of applause. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the folks from the Community Media Center. They were a great help to us. So very, very professional. And this was streamed live tonight. It is also recorded, so it will be available on the Community Media Center website for you to view. And they also will be broadcasting it periodically up until the primary election on the cable access TV stations. So, and I also want to thank the South Carroll Senior Center for allowing us to have this event. I think that's all we have for tonight. Thank you once again. Please come to our dinner in May, okay? The Democratic Victory Dinner. Come back up to Westminster, May the 19th, I think. So there's your official invitation.